It's very fun sometimes to watch people defect because one thing, especially that we've seen about all these conservatives that have defected to reform, especially at a local level, when you look into their history, shall we say, most of it is not good. Very, very rarely were these conservatives actually former leaders of the council or on the ministerial position. No, they tend to be very lowly members, shall we say, of that conservative administration. Not very much, shall we say, trusted with the big stuff because it was very, shall we say, obvious that they were, shall we say, not up to snuff, which explains a lot about a lot of these shall we say, conservative members who jumped over to reform at a local level. However, this, of course, hasn't just happened at a local party level because, believe it or not, just last night we found out that Jake Berry had defected to reform, and this is honestly quite funny because Jake Berry was like the original, red wall Tory. He was breaking the red wall before it was cool, and of course, he was the original instigator and the leader of the Northern Research Group, if you remember that. And the other thing, of course, Jake Berry, not, shall we say, considered to be the brightest spark in the room in many cases, never really reached a very high ministerial role, never was really considered to be that good an MP. And we're going to cover what the thought is of him defecting to Reform UK. And Henry Hill pulls no punches, at all. In fact, as you'll see in a moment, you know, sometimes, these very low level people who think they deserved a lot higher position jump to reform expecting that they are going to get and receive this higher position, which I highly suspect is why Berry's defected. And in fact, there's a lot of people suspecting because remember, Berry was a big, big trust defender. There's now a lot of people thinking, is Nigel trying to get Liz Truss on board as well? If he does, oh boy, that will be funny. That will be funny. That'll just be like the cherry on the incompetence Sunday that Nigel Farage is creating for Reform UK. So before, of course, we do go into this, please do, of course, click the like and share and subscribe button as well. And of course, don't forget to ring the bell as well. So there are links down below as well for the Patreon page, the Buy Me a Coffee link, the YouTube thank you button, and of course, as always, there is the YouTube membership button down below as well, so you can help the channel support that as well. And of course, thank you very much to all those people who do help and support the channel that way. So with that said, let's crack on then into this because oof, no punches were pulled. No punches were pulled in this. So as Berry defects to reform, the Conservative Party must now decide what to do about former MPs. So, I have two abiding memories of Sir Jake Berry. I didn't even know he'd been knighted, to be honest. That was news to me when I read that. Anyway, it continues. The former, of course, Conservative Party MP and, of course, one-time chairman who last night announced his defection to Reform UK. The first was, of course, some years ago when his office got in touch to ask for a meeting. And when I, just a few days later, when we met, he asked me why I wanted to see him. Just absolutely savage on that front. And quite frankly, I am a very, very much big believer that if someone does defect and you know that they were an idiot or an incompetent, I fully believe you should just dish the dirt. Just say, oh yeah, at least he's not part of our party anymore. I think Henry Hill here rightly is just going to go, well, you know what? This is the type of caliber candidate that Reform UK is now recruiting. Anyway, the second, and of course far more significant, was of course the 2023 conference of the Northern Research Group of Tory MPs, which he founded and of course led. Again, we talked about before, and we talked about many times in the past. In his, of course, main speech at the Doncaster Racecourse, Jake, of course, joined a chorus now of Redwall MPs demanding some variation now of full fiscal devolution for the North. Given, of course, that titular focus of the conference was then levelling up, and that levelling up was usually interpreted as higher levels of Westminster spending, investment in left-behind areas, it was quite startling to see the representative after representative from areas now with enormous fiscal transfer deficits call for their region to be cast back hard on its own resources. So at least we knew what Henry Hill thought of of leveling up, at least. So, whether it, of course, was the accelerationist libertarianism or innumeracy, I never, of course, quite found out. Perhaps, of course, it was going to appear in the next Reform Manifesto. Well, it almost certainly is going to appear in the next Reform Manifesto because they are absolutely going in hard on their libertarianism, on their big cuts stuff. Anyway, it continues. It will almost now be very certainly be interesting to see what impact, if any, Jake has on reform's development. As our former colleague Will Atkinson notes in today's Telegraph, he has a quote, considerable organizational experience, Brio. A suitably firm line now on the culture wars, not to mention putting now considerable effort into particularly political question now of the North, where reform now has a lot of prospects, albeit as noted above, with sometimes very questionable results. Not too good thinking on their former former MP there, isn't it? And of course, Will Atkinson now writing in the Telegraph quite a lot. I've really got to go back and start cover Will some more because I miss covering Will and his Tory midlife crisis. I really do. Maybe another time. Maybe when Reform aren't screwing up as much. Maybe when they're being quiet. Anyway. It continues. Of course, on the other hand, such is, of course, Nigel Farage's grip on reform, and in, of course, fairness to him, so wholly now built on his appeal and the party's popularity, that it is, of course, very difficult to see how any individual can make any much of a difference. Farage does the media, Farage dictates the policy, and as a vehicle now for returning to Parliament, however, it might do fine. Reform is, of course, pulling ahead in, of course, Jake's old seat. Gee, I wonder what first attracted Jake Berry to joining Reform. I wonder what attracted him to joining Reform. I'm sure it has nothing about that voting intention, right? Right. Anyway, that in itself is, of course, a bit of a puzzle, though. Reform is, of course, supposed to be an outsider. Come now to sweep away the detritus now of the past 20 or 30 years. It is all very well for Jake to say that if we weren't, quote, deliberately trying to wreck the country, you'd be hard-pressed to do a better job than the last 2 decades of Labour and Tory rule. But he was part of it. And in recent past, though, thought the solution was Tom Tugendhat. Again, we forget, of course, that he backed Tugendhat, of course, in that. Obviously, Farage can do most of the running in terms of trying to keep reform up in the polls. But when thinking about, of course, a potential reform government, it is worth noting that of the 5 MPs returned under its colours last summer, neither of the 2 genuine outsiders, of course, remained in the party. They got kicked out now for different reasons, of course. Yet, poor candidate selection and now the inability to stomach independent-minded colleagues are both facets of the same very larger problem. that Farage seems now incapable of identifying, attracting, and indeed tolerating the sort of talent you actually need to generally build a new party. And that's why we've said many, many times, if it is this bad at a local council level, how bad would a reform government generally be? To the point where Farage wants to give ministerial jobs to outsiders, people who haven't even been voted in. So much for all that that rhetoric he used to say back in the day of these unelected bureaucrats. So much for all that. Anyway, back to this. The gradual tilt now of the balance now of his bench towards defectors is now contrary now of his revolutionary potential. It is now hard to staff a revolution. I can't even say that word on YouTube. I'll get in trouble. Oh no, sorry, with retreads. Sorry, I thought it was that was my dyslexia kicking in. So it's hard to staff a revolution with retreads. Such now considerations must also be in the minds of CCHQ, charged with now, of course, overhauling candidate selections. Following the absolute rout at the general election, we now have a lot of ex-MPs, many of whom will be very much keen to return to the Commons. But how many should be allowed to do so? Again, very genuine question on that front. After all, it is already very hard to pose as a renewed party when your shadow cabinet has quite much so experience in the very previous government. Again, very true indeed. How are you a new party when all your cabinet is being part of those previous terrible administrations? So, should they actually be allowed to restand? Or should they actually be going to try and attract new candidates? They should be trying to attract new candidates and training them. That should be Kimmy Badnock's first, really number one priority. But of course, it's not at all. A number one priority at the moment just seems to be doing nothing in many respects. So we asked our panelists that very question in the most recent survey. And as you can see, 75% said that they should not qualify at all for the candidate list. It is a very, of course, interesting result. Note that this wasn't, again, whether or not former MPs should be automatically selected for seats, merely whether they should be actually able to bypass the normal nomination process for getting on the list, and whether the new one turns out to be, yet still not a quarter of the party members thought so. We may, of course, return to this subject in a lot more detail as the party now overhaul develops, but it looks like party members are now keen for new blood. Perhaps, of course, we might yet see more ex-comrades deciding that Farage offers an easier, quick route back to the green benches. Yeah, and I think, honestly, a lot of those ex-colleagues are going to be quite bad because both, as you've seen here, Henry Hill and even Will Atkinson were very, very quick to say, yeah, this guy wasn't a good Tory. He wasn't any talent at all. Good riddance to him in many respects. I mean, the first story that Henry Hill gives, where his office got in touch with him for like, so yeah, we want to meet. And then he goes, oh, so why did you want to meet with me? Bit weird, that. Bit weird. And of course, bringing up his crazy libertarian stance on his northern stuff on there. People in the comments down here saying, see it, yeah. Well, Berry was a firm Truss apologist. The wisdom of his judgment speaks for itself. Berry, of course, wants back in Westminster. He knows the Tories have very little chance, so he's very happy to ride Farage's coattails to get back into power. Even better. Again, even better is Reform MP can now ape Farage, do absolutely no consistency work, and only turn it to Commons now for a few sound bites at PMQs, and heavily indulge in the subsidised bars and restaurants, all while claiming to be a man of the people. Very much. Oh, yeah. Berry, of course, spoke at a recent Conservative area dinner back in February, and it was very amusingly dismissive of reform. There was, of course, a rumour he'd fancy standing as a Conservative candidate for Mayor of Cheshire. So it would be very interesting to see if he ends up being the Reform candidate. He's also now connected with Anglesey, so he might even pop up there in the Senate election next year. He appears to be yet another political chancer. Again, not a lot of people have very high opinions of Berry. Someone else says here, Berry is absolutely no loss to the party. It was his and other similar failures who contributed to the government's very poor performance in 2015. Reform is, of course, welcome to him. Let's hope that any remaining Tory MPs who may, of course, not be actual Conservatives decide how to defect to the Lib Dems do so very quickly. So, yeah. Jake Berry defecting. Highly comical. Especially the fact that you've had just a lot of people just go, wow, the welcome to him, you know? Very welcome to him indeed. But poor Jake Berry, he says, laughing. But yeah, let me know what you think about all this, because this is, again, quite funny. I would not be too surprised if we saw some other, shall we say, former MPs defect, especially, shall we say, maybe some of like the lesser known MPs or people like Jake Berry who want to try and get re-elected and get back into Parliament, and then probably, depending on which way the political wind is blowing, just switch parties to whichever one they happen to want to go to. That will be very interesting. The more, like I say, this reform of CCHQ gets rolled out. Although, again, from what we've been hearing, it's not so much as a reform of CCHQ, it's more a tinkering around the edges because it's rapidly running out of money, because the Conservative Party is in a bit of financial trouble. Even though it doesn't get brought up too much, it is quite in a bit of a hole, with, again, rumours that they might have to sell their London office, which, that will be very, very funny if that happens. So let me know what you think, of course, about all of this. And of course, don't forget to hit the like and subscribe button, and of course, ring the bell as well to make sure you get notified when videos get put out as well. So, as always, thank you very much for watching. And of course, as always, we'll see you all next time.